Do you ever wonder what happened to your friends from high school? I mean, you were so close. You laughed together, you cried together, you shared some of the best years of your lives together. And yet, somehow through life, you just lost touch. Now it's time to relive those moments once again. Introducing the podcast that takes you back in time to the place where it all began. This is Class Reunion. We're bringing you all the gossip, secrets, and scandals from your high school days that you won't want to miss. Join us as we catch up with old classmates and dive into the wildest stories from our high school days. From those legendary parties to the infamous cliques, we're spilling all the tea on who's who and what really went down. So grab a seat, turn your volume up, and get ready for a trip down memory lane. Class Reunion, the podcast that reunites us all. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Class Reunion. Thank you so much for joining. Today is going to be a single episode, and I'm going to fumble my way through it, so bear with me. It's one of those that kind of is the culmination to my story and how I started Class Reunion. And so I'm going to share and be very vulnerable with you, but just know that it's not meant to have a negative impact. It's just my story. And if I can, I will bring you back up to speed. I had talked about on my last single episode, walking you through the loss of my mother. And actually, I was a guest on a hospice podcast talking about the experience of having two parents go through hospice and how they can actually have such unique and different outcomes, if you will, or experiences that you go through. And so when that episode is ready to air, I look forward to sharing it with you because it's an interesting conversation. So, as I shared last time, my mother unfortunately passed away of leukemia. She was a great warrior. She accepted her circumstances and she really had peace in where she was heading. Fast forward to 2020, and we all know that was just a shit show in general. And having the demise of my father's health, or the decline, I should say, of my father's health was just icing on the cake to what we were already experiencing in 2020. So he had been living on his own and doing quite well, still golfing. He had a girlfriend, of course, and everything was progressing. But there had been moments of where he had been falling quite a bit. And it was just like so rapid, the decline. It really, really was. And so what we found out in 2020 was that my father was suffering from Parkinson's. And Parkinson's is something that many people can live with for a long period of time, and it can be managed by medication, which ironically is one type of medication for all different types of Parkinson's disease. It's very interesting when you dive down into that disease. But in his case, it had taken such a rapid progression that he needed to go into independent living. And that was a huge leap for somebody that had been living in a house, on a golf course, had a lot of friends, drove everywhere for dinner and events, and had a social calendar that was always full. And so that transition and that discussion was something that obviously was never going to be a smooth one, because it was making that decision way before his time, and he was emotionally ready for that. Okay, so as we're trying to weed through this conversation of independent living, again, I mentioned his health had been declining so rapidly that we met with a assisted living and independent living facility. We wanted there to be a step-down unit, as needed. We met for a consultation. Now, the full circle moment was the location that we actually looked into placing our father was one that Joe, my son, had been a server at during his high school years. So it was extremely weird to be coming back with this life-altering decision and placing my dad in a place where my son had worked through high school. It was called Coral Oaks in Palm Harbor. We met with the staff and they were great. And actually they were really lovely because they did remember Joe working in the cafeteria there. There is a, examination and an interview process, and it works with both the physician and the admissions director to decide how to place somebody. And in the course of that interview, and due to some of the medical records, it was determined that he could not qualify for independent living, that he was going to have to go into assisted living. And assisted living would still be where he was on his own. He could decide if he wanted to make meals. There was going to be a little kitchenette, but that the services they provided were much more available to help if he needed anything within the room to give medication or if he wanted to have his meals. It's just a little bit more where you had some one on one interaction with the staff. And so here we are in the peak of COVID. This change is now rocking his world to where he is no longer qualified for independent, but only assisted. And I mean, to be fair, there's reason for him to be ornery and very upset about what's happening. It was intense, to say the least, and there were some words that were exchanged that weren't always pleasant, and it was a very difficult impact on our relationship. My brother was also down in Florida helping out with this whole process. So the three of us, it was kind of probably to him felt like there was two against one. But I needed his backup and his help in some of these decisions that we were making. And so we went down the path of needing to get him in sooner rather than later. And they're not always available. You have to wait for a unit to arise, and you have to make a decision in a short period of time. So this came about pretty quickly that there was a room available. Now imagine trying to place someone in that situation who really was thinking they were going to go into independent, has to now share with all of his friends who he just, recently, as a couple months ago, was golfing and having dinner and driving around, that he's going to be in assisted living. And in conjunction with that, he has a 3-bedroom home that is completely fully furnished that he had lived in for many years since my parents moved down to Florida full time. So it was a lot. And in order to also secure that room, don't forget, with COVID, you had to constantly be tested, and you really couldn't do anything until you had a negative result. And so we had done 2 types of COVID testing that just one was available through his doctor's office. It didn't get processed in time. We were about ready to lose the room. So I had to get him in the car and drive him through a drive-through COVID test, which was incredibly bizarre because they wanted him to perform it, which I thought was kind of weird. The guy could barely, move his arms in certain directions, and he had to stick this swab up his nose and fill out the vial himself. But we did it, and that too sat in a lab because they were so backed up. We didn't know what to do. We couldn't put the house on the market until we really felt like we could clear out the living space. It had, quite a few things in there, as you can imagine, over the course of time. It was just something that we really didn't want to start doing in his presence to pack up the house to sell it. We wanted to have him be moved first. And the pressure was just unbelievable. It was incredible. And so suffice it to say, we finally did get back a negative COVID test. I had to actually call the CEO of this distribution company that was doing the tests and explain our situation and beg her to put his vial as far ahead as she could, because we had already missed 2 opportunities. That's a whole long story in itself. But I did it. And then we had to secure moving. I'm only sharing all of these specific details because if anybody had to go through anything like this at all during COVID, I just know you're going to relate. You're going to relate to it on every level, that nothing about that time in 2020 was pleasant. And so here we are trying to negotiate with my dad on a daily basis on what he can and can't bring. We're talking about a room that was probably 500 square feet at the most, maybe 400. It was going to be a bed, a chair, a TV, not much else. And this is a guy that, was used to entertaining and just wasn't able to comprehend the limited amount of things he could bring to his new living facility. So we also had to have movers that were approved by the facility who adhered to COVID guidelines. Understandable, but being able to secure their time as well and having everything line up. They too were busy moving people in and out of nursing homes or assisted living. And so the pressure of the whole situation was just nuts. And we were also thinking to ourselves, how do we put this man in this new location where he's going to live, not be granted the opportunity to be inside and expect everything to be okay? I mean, that's an extremely heightened situation for everyone involved. So we spoke with the director and she said, I will give you 30 minutes after the movers have been inside for you to go in, make sure your father's, belongings are where they want it to be. And that's all we can do. And you'll have to, wear your like hazmat suit, right? The tension was thick, thick. And the day we moved was just emotional for everybody. God, I could get upset thinking about it, but not for the reasons you think. I was mad at the man. But anyway, so we got him all situated in the room. My brother and I went in for 30 minutes. We had to move everything all over again because he's very OCD and particular about things. And so his anxiety was absolutely through the roof. And we did the best that we could to settle him in. And I'm going to fast forward that now we were left with the house and we really wanted to put it on the market so that he would also have some extra income for anything that would happen in the foreseeable future to pay for his facility or doctor's appointments, or anything he may need from that moment on, which is actually a very good thing that we did that because things did decline, like I said, rapidly. So my brother and I are back at this house just looking around thinking, what on earth are we going to do with all this stuff? There was no drop off at Salvation Army. They were not allowed in the complex, nor were they in service to do any pickups. They were, declining any drivers going into people's homes at that time. And so we didn't even have the option to sell anything. I called a company that does like an online estate sale, and we did a video of the whole inside of the house. And she said that we didn't have anything that she wanted to sell online. So, it was a beautiful house, but obviously it was dated and there was absolutely nothing that she wanted to sell online. So we were really up shit's creek, let me just tell you. And then came the idea that we're just going to have to throw everything out. I mean, I know I will pause. I will let you think about that for a moment. How do you take a 3-bedroom house and just throw it in a dumpster? But honestly, guys, we didn't have a choice. And we all had our own homes. I was in an apartment in downtown Tampa. My brother was in an apartment in Dunedin. Like, we couldn't even fathom storing this stuff that none of us realistically wanted. Again, wasn't that it was bad, but there wasn't an extra cup that we needed in our lives. Thus began the dumpster dive that we did over the course of a week. And the two of us went in that house, went through every room, every day, and threw shit out. And I will never forget, like on the third day, we were on our second dumpster. We had filled one, we ordered another one. We came to the house and we looked at each other and said, my God, it doesn't even look like we did anything. I mean, we felt like we were on a mission and had accomplished so much and we're sweating like crazy. And yet we hadn't even touched the surface. We had so much more to get rid of. It was crazy. He had a huge desk in his office that was like that really heavy particle board, like those big solder desks. Remember those? And it was like in a corner. So it was a corner shaped with a hutch on top. just super heavy. We had to sledgehammer that to get it into the dumpster. They had a king size armoire bed set. So their lights were on the headboard, and then each side had drawers that went to the ceiling. Huge. We had to take a hammer and rip that apart. Remember, nobody's taking mattresses, so we're having to throw that. Bikes. There were some things that we were trying to give to the neighbors, but again, they have their own stuff. And also, not everybody felt comfortable coming over taking anything because we were really in the peak of the pandemic. Holy cow. I mean, the nerves were constant for both of us. And we looked at each other and said, we need a third dumpster. We need a third. I mean, I think we ended up with 4. I can't fully remember. But it was arduous to just take everything out of the cabinets. There was beautiful china. I know there's going to be a lot of you that are going to say, why didn't you store it and sell it later? You know, the role that we were playing at this point was so tense that looking towards profit 5 years from now and trying to find a storage unit just wasn't even in our bandwidth. So I'm sure a lot of you are going to disagree with our method, but at that time, 2 things were happening. The relationship was very strained, and we didn't really want any more responsibility to this issue. Again, you're free to disagree, but there's a lot of mental health at stake here. And to just carry on looking forward from 5 years from now to pay for a storage unit, to sell some china, just wasn't in our cards. It wasn't going to be healthy for either of us. We had siblings that were in Michigan. We were not going to be shipping things up to Michigan. It just was a family decision. And I will say that we all agreed and spoke about how we were moving forward, like on a daily basis. I mean, we were all texting one another to make sure we were in the loop of what was happening. So we did put it on the market and it sold quickly. And remember, we had to have masks available. I mean, the showings were something that had to be approved at the gate because nobody was allowed in the gate. It was crazy. But we did end up selling it to a couple from Wisconsin, which was actually kind of a bittersweet because that's where my parents were originally from. So there was, some beauty that another couple was going to find joy in being in this house, and they were from where my parents grew up. So that was kind of nice. But I got to tell you, it wasn't over. And so he continued to decline. We could barely get him between the 2 of us to any doctor's appointments. There's all those contraptions that you can put on the inside of the door handle to, create some balance to get people in and out of the car. We did everything that we could to be able to maintain some doctor's appointments with us without needing any assistance so that he didn't feel, out of place with it. And that was time consuming. And both of us had to put meetings on hold. Of course, you're going to do these things, but it was a lot to juggle while everyone was working home, in 2020. That was crazy in itself. Then we're trying to manage these doctor's appointments. He is becoming more difficult for the 2 of us, who now he weighs like 80 pounds. We still couldn't maneuver him in the way that we needed to. It was a ton on our bodies and our minds. And of course, he's the one that's suffering, but everyone's involved when somebody is ill. So we had to move him. He fell so many times. There was something that happened in his back. We had to move him again because there's all these different levels of help that I learned later that Florida has for requirements. And he couldn't be released from the hospital back to where he lived because now he was going to need more help than what was available according to the level that they were certified in this assisted living. So we had to move him again. We had to find another place that would allow, any kind of Hoyer lifts into a shower. We had to find a place that would allow hospice procedure to take place, which wasn't at the current place he was at. And we're learning all of these things on the fly. We're just gathering information as fast as we can and having to make rapid decisions before this man is even discharged from the hospital. And so here we go again in COVID, having to do the same type of programmed move where it had to be approved by a certain moving company, and he had to have a negative test from the rehab unit before he went to this new facility. And we moved him a second time. Now the requirements are getting even more difficult. We are now only able to speak through a window, and that was something that had to be scheduled because all the families wanted to speak to their loved ones through the window. So you had to pick a certain time and be able to get there. And it didn't really matter, but it was driving back and forth. That wasn't around the corner for me. And the two of us would try to alternate who could go. Sometimes we would be there together, my brother and I, or we'd split the task. It was the most nerve-wracking time that something could happen to a loved one. And you know what? We weren't alone. I mean, we had people that, had people in the hospital and couldn't see them, or children were being born, and that time period, we weren't the only ones suffering through this, which is why I'm sharing it, because it's almost like we forgot. But to go back to that and think of it, and as I'm talking through the process, it was debilitating in your mind and your physical being. It was crazy. So went to the next place, and at this point, we knew we had a matter of time. There was not going to be any improvement. The steps that they were trying to take for rehab weren't working. And it was determined that he could now be a candidate for hospice because we were running into the need for possibly tube feeding or things like that, because oftentimes in Parkinson's, the eating and drinking is so cumbersome and painful. It's a cruel disease that the end can be very difficult. The conversations were combative, rightfully so, but just imagine. I mean, it's playing on your mind. Like you really don't want to be yelled at this point. I understand where he was coming from, but it was also very hard to hear as we were doing the best that we could. And I share that because going back to being on that podcast, you can have two experiences with hospice, and because they're two different people, the outcome is going to be drastically different. And I don't know that we were fully prepared for it to be as drastic of a difference as it was because of the fact that he was so mad at us towards the end. It wasn't the self-reflection of being our father or our life or anything like that. It was still a very controlling, negative encounter. And that was just his personality. But, on top of what we were feeling, it was like, it just wasn't going very well. So now we're moving towards hospice and understanding that, again, this is taking place without us being able to be at the bedside. And also very difficult for my siblings in Michigan who weren't able to really spend any time with him. My brother did fly. I think they both flew down briefly, or my brother did, and was able to meet with him for a few minutes. But that was it. Like, it was a very short encounter, and hospice began. Now, this is the part where, bear with me because it's terrible and funny at the same time. So he had been undergoing the hospice care, but now they're letting us know that he has maybe a couple days left. And by the grace of God, we were allowed to be inside. Now, what we had to wear was, like I said, the hazmat suit that you couldn't breathe in. You were sweating. When I say sweating, I mean sweating. It was polyester, I don't even know what fabric. It was a non-breathing fabric with the plastic covered helmets, that you have to wear. And all that had to be done in the lobby. We had to make sure that we provided negative COVID tests. And then we went upstairs. And I guess the sad and humorous part of this process was that man didn't want to go. So here my mom was full of grace and understood where her situation lied. Our father was not ready to go, didn't want to face the situation. All very, very, very understandable, but an entirely different personality, and one that was, like I said, combative in nature. So he is doing everything he can to fight the situation. He is still trying, without being able to put a word together, dictate tasks and things that we should be doing for him, because that's what he's used to doing. That's just his nature. He's used to barking orders, and he was going to go out barking orders. And where the humor lies in that, hospice is not a perfect science, right? But this one nurse would be so set that he had, 1 hour left, and we would be there and thinking it was happening. And then, like I said, this man would rally and open his eyes and stare at us. And it was determined that he possibly had another 2 more days. And so uh, we left. We said, listen, we haven't even eaten. We've got to get out of here to eat food. And can we do that? And I think we'll have plenty of time. And she said, sure. So we went and had lunch, and we actually had a shot. Not going to lie, because we just needed to calm our nerves. Went back, and again, this is where the humor lies. The hospice nurse is trying to be so nice about surmising how our father is feeling. And she would say things like, oh, he's reaching out to you. He's wanting you to know how he loves you. And my brother and I would turn around and step out of the room and laugh and be like, she has no idea. He's really reaching for us to wring our necks. Like, that's what he really wanted to do. So there's where the humor is, in a way where hospice was thinking that he was so loving and appreciative of the moment of his passing and crossing over. We knew he was pissed and did not want to cross over, and just gave us looks that haunted us for a while. Deeply haunted us for a while. We both left. We stayed as long as we could, and sad to say that he had passed early in the morning. And the weird thing is, the hospice nurse, again, everyone had the best of intentions, but she called me and said, your father's passing away. I want you to hear. I'm sorry I'm laughing. It's just, sometimes you don't know what to do in these awkward situations. She put the phone to his mouth, and said, I want you to hear his last breath. Oh God, I'm going to go to hell. So, I mean, I know what she was trying to do was loving, but I had to sit there, because mind you, he can't hear me and she can't hear me. And I had to sit there for 10 minutes listening to his labored breathing until he was no longer with us. And maybe some of you would appreciate that. I don't know. It was really emotional for me, and again, was haunting. So that was quite difficult for me to have to work through, knowing that's the last sounds, and it didn't set well with me. So it was sad to say that he had passed on. We didn't end up having a funeral because we couldn't at the church. And it was just, anybody who went through 2020 losing somebody understands completely what I'm talking about, that the situation and the timing was so incredibly different. And again, my hospice experience was so incredibly different, and the circumstances of each person and their personalities was different. And so now the 4 of us as siblings, that storyline of having 2 parents is no longer. So I also know many of you can relate to that too. So when you finally have that ending of both of your parents being gone, it's a huge adjustment. It's no longer like you just have one parent. You're done. And there's effort that comes into maintaining family traditions and conversations as siblings, knowing you don't have that tie-in with your parent anymore. And I will say we've done a very good job. My sister and my two brothers and I have done a very good job of moving forward, but it hasn't been without self-reflection. And it hasn't been without each of us in our very own way reconciling that loss, because he was a different loss for each of us than my mother was. And we each had different feelings about our parents. Parents say they don't have favorites, but they do know that their relationships are different amongst each child. And that's how we were with our parents. How we were raised was reflective of our age and our time and our experiences. And so for me, it left a whole lot of unresolved feelings. In some ways, it was closure that my responsibility to my parents was done. It's a thing that I did on my own. It was a burden that I placed upon myself. And if you do hear my stories, my single episodes, I was very, very intertwined and encased in their marriage. I needed their help with Joe because I didn't have any other resources. So I was holding on to that relationship for the benefit of my son. And that's all very complicated when it's coming to an end. And so I spent 21 and 22 in a really bad place. Number one, COVID had, wreaked havoc on all of us. And number two, my emotions were all over the map. Number three, physically, I was not well, which I'll address at another time. And that culmination of all of those events was really how I began a path of self-discovery and how Class Reunion was born. Going through that process of healing and things that I did towards my recovery after all of that, emotionally and physically, are really what brought about the birth of Class Reunion. So stay tuned for that next time, and you'll understand and relate to why I wanted to go backwards before I could move forward. So thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Class Reunion. All right, friends, that's it for this episode of Class Reunion Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show, write us a review, and share this podcast with a friend. Until next time.